Hello, everyone. It is now 12 noon on the West Coast here in California. Welcome to Dilan Delivers. This is a free webinar series sponsored by Dilan Consulting Group based out of San Francisco, California. Today's topic is Creative Together, Sparking Innovation in the New World of Work, featuring Dr. Stephen Kowalski. My name is Paul Bayonne. I am one of the senior consultants here at Dilan. Briefly, let me go to share my screen here so you can all see what I'm talking about. Briefly, Dilan Consulting Group is a team of psychologists who work with organizations to build their leadership and team capabilities. Our trademark motto is business is human. The way we see it, our clients are the experts in their businesses, and we are experts about people and understanding and shaping those persons' behaviors. When we merge these two expertise domains together, that collaboration helps leaders and teams and people and organizations unleash the human potential that enables those organizations to thrive. We help your people and organizations address the relationships and communication and leadership amongst themselves and with your organization's internal and external stakeholders so that voices and perspectives are heard, needs are addressed, and participants are both included and valued, all in order to make your organization succeed in its business missions and objectives. The goal of this free Dilan Delivers webinar series is to bring you all, our attendees, content that you might find both interesting and helpful in you and your organization's work efforts. We are video recording this session for posting on Dilan's YouTube channel. You all will receive an email from us with a link to this video recording so you can view it at another later time. There'll also be a link in that email for a survey about the session. So we ask you to go ahead and fill out that survey at your earliest convenience when you get it. And we look forward to getting your feedback about our webinar series. Also, when you registered for this webinar, you likely saw a notice about how a webinar registrants will receive 3 of the webinar registrants will receive a signed copy of Dr. Kowalski's brand new book that we'll be talking about today. We'll be notifying the winners of this random drawing within the next 24 hours or so. So keep an eye open for that email notice from us. That notice is also going to go out to everyone because that's going to have the survey link in it as well. On your Zoom screen, you will probably see a Q&A button at the bottom. The chat is disabled, but the Q&A is active. I'll be monitoring all questions that you send us during this webinar and then posing your questions to our panelists during the last 15 minutes or so of today's presentation. And with that, let me now quickly introduce our 2 panelists. First, our moderator, Dr. Eugene Dilan. He is the founder of Dilan Consulting Group. After about a decade or so of working as a clinical psychologist and doing lots of directorial work within organizations, he turned his attention to national and international consulting at the beginning of the millennium, and ended up taking that passion for people and business to the new level. Worked for a decade within an international consulting firm, and then in 2011 founded Dilan Consulting Group. And you heard me talk about the business is human motto a minute or so ago. That's basically the credo where all that came from his expertise and experience in the consultation field. Essentially, he works with all of us on his team to transform a diverse range of organizations across the spectrum, Fortune 500 firms, nonprofits, startups in tech, biotech, energy, defense, aerospace, and more. You'll get to hear more of Eugene's perspective as he moderates today's session. Dr. Kowalski, our esteemed guest here today, is a leading voice in the global movement for conscious creativity. He has more than 25 years of experience as an organizational development expert, facilitating the creativity of scientists, engineers, business leaders, and professionals across industries, blazing new trails and catalyzing creative potential and delivering real world information. He brings curiosity, passion, and perspective to shape organizational cultures, to reinvigorate how teams co-create new value. He's the author of the recently published book that will be discussed today, Creative Together, Sparking Innovation in the New World of Work. Throughout his career, he's worked both internally and externally as a coach, speaker, and consultant partner focused on organizational creativity and transformation. And having this unique inside-outside perspective really gives him deep insight into the structural, interpersonal, and process dynamics that inhibit the realization of change. Over the years, he's led many strategic initiatives, including a currently ongoing very long tenure at Genentech, where he provides OD solutions that impact performance and business aims. In addition, he also delivers his bold solutions that are scalable and sustainable through his firm Creative License Consulting Services. He also holds a Ph.D. in adult learning and organizational creativity from UCLA and is the author of over 100 workplace learning programs. So with that, here are two individuals. If you can go ahead and come up on the screen here, and I will drop out and let the two of you do your thing with today's presentation.
Hello there, Steve. How are you?
Hey, great, Eugene. Thank you so much for having me today. And hello and welcome to everyone.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I have your book. I have read it. It's got writing all over it. I took it on vacation and it was by the pool with me the whole time. I want to say a couple of things. One of them, in the spirit of transparency, I wanted everyone to know that cousin Steve and I are kind of sort of related. And I say kind of sort of because Steve is actually the cousin of my brother-in-law's wife. And we've known each other for about 19 to 20 years now. With that, again, I just want to say thank you for being here. I want to ask if there's anything else you want to add about yourself before we jump in, because I want to make sure there's so many good nuggets in here. I want to make sure that we spend time picking your brain and hearing from you. The only other thing I'll say before I turn it over is this. In talking to Steve about the book, it's really clear that he's passionate about this topic and that he's been cultivating it probably most of his life. And you'll see that it just kind of pours out of him the knowledge about creativity and his passion for it, and it's contagious. And so I'm excited to get this going. So if you want to add anything else in terms of introduction or frame before I hit you with my little list of questions that I've been pulling together.
No, that's great. Paul did a wonderful job with the introduction, very thorough, and I'd love to dive in.
Okay, so Steve, my first question is really why this book and why now? And the reason for this question is because it's clear in the book that you've been chewing on this topic for a very long time. So,
well, maybe I'll start by asking our listeners a couple of questions.
Yeah.
And the first question is, why do you think your creativity is needed today, tomorrow, in your world of work, with your family, achieving the desired aims you have, the things you dream about? Why is your creativity needed? And then what are the possibilities around you? Maybe there are lots of possibilities you're not seeing. I know I miss a ton of them for various reasons. We could probably talk about that. What are the possibilities in your world right now? And what are the constraining forces? What are the obstacles that you're facing? And how might bringing your creativity to those obstacles and constraints actually help you realize the purposes? So I thought I'd start with these three questions, because I think these three questions kind of embody why I wanted to bring this book forward. I see people walking around with a limiting constellation of beliefs and assumptions and myths about what creativity is and who we are as creators. And so I've watched this story as far back as I can remember. I've been playing and working with my creativity. I love to build things. I like to draw. I like to create things and generate solutions. I mean, I define creativity as generating solutions and inventing solutions to the problems we either face, like a pandemic or a flood or a restructuring in our company or whatever. We face those those challenges and opportunities, or the ones we design for ourselves. A mission or a quest we set ourselves on, or some piece of work that our organization needs and asks us to participate in. So I've been exploring creativity all my life, as you said. Book has probably been in there percolating for over 30 years. Why now? Our world has gotten so much more complex and uncertain, and I won't go into the litany of ways that that shows up in all of our lives, but what I've seen over and over again, and more recently, is that we have to start getting creative together. That going it alone is going to lead to single points of failure more often. I was driving one day and I saw a bumper sticker on a truck, and it said, "Help, I'm making mistakes faster than I can learn from them." And I feel like that's one of the possible futures ahead of us if we don't change the way we work together, the way we create together, the way we show up and stand together. So we'll talk a lot more about these things, but I just see it going it alone. It's just not going to work. It's not going to be scalable. It's not going to be sustainable. So I wanted to bring this new way of thinking about creativity, the new story, what I call the new story of creativity, out into the world to help people rethink who they are as creators and how they show up more effectively to create together.
What I love about what you just said in terms of failing alone, when you think about the success of groups, whether it's a 12-step group, a losing weight group, a grief group, we are social beings. And so it really is, I think in a lot of ways great that we're finally thinking about how do we come together around creation versus around just when we're struggling with something. And so I do think the possibilities are endless. Speaking of, again, co-creating, one of the questions that I have here for you is really about how when we co-create, we show up with everything that we've been through already. I always say that my way of understanding the world is really through the lens of everything that I've been through. And so obviously that's going to influence the way that I show up and the way that I co-create. So can you speak a little bit more about that? And in particular, I would love for you to speak about the different styles, because I do think that the styles you outline in the book, to me, really, I think will help people to understand how what they're doing is helpful or maybe not as helpful, and maybe the reality of us having this whole menu of ways and possibilities. And sometimes we just default to the things that we default to. So anyway, I'm going to shut up and turn it back to you, the expert.
Well, maybe just to put that question in context, I'll say that the book is organized in 3 adventures. And the first adventure is an inner journey to reclaim our creativity as a potential, and then learn about these superpowers and how we can craft a new story of who we are as creators. The reason to go on that inner journey is to create more effectively and co-create more effectively with others. And so fast forwarding to that co-creation, in the beginning of the second adventure of the book, I talk about these 4 creative styles, the soloist, the rebel, the entrepreneur, and the collaborator. And we each have all 4 of these that we bring, and they come out of our socialized experience of growing up and our story of opportunity. What happened when we tried something new? What happened when we broke the rules? Who supported us? Who didn't? Were there resources there for us? Were we in a situation where we were struggling to get the resources we need? So that story of opportunity and the socialization that happens through our early family years, our school years, college, and into work, right? That forms habits and patterns and beliefs, and these become not fixed. I want to be really clear. These are not fixed, but they sort of coalesce into a style. And one of these 4 styles is typically more dominant. So for example, I am more naturally a soloist. I like to create into the space that I think is within my sphere of control. If you think about a teacher, for example, my doctorate dissertation was in school. So if you think about a teacher has their classroom, and that's in a way a space that they might own. And so I saw teachers who I would say were strong soloists, who were incredibly expressive with their creative potential in their classroom, they didn't really pay much attention to what was happening in the school or in the district or anything else, but they wanted to create an incredible environment for their students. So like me, like other soloists, right? We tend to think about what's in our sphere of control, we create into that. And we think that our ideas are ours, right? I had that idea. And I hear a lot of people like, that's my idea. Oh no, that was my idea. Who came up with that idea, right? We have this ownership thing with ideas. So soloists, rebels, and entrepreneurs struggle with this ownership idea, like my idea, my vision. Entrepreneurs tend to lose interest if the vision that they have starts, if what's happening starts to shift away from the vision that they have. They may go start up another venture, right? But entrepreneurs are more focused on the system. And so if you see, let's just continue with the school example. If you see someone in the school who may be involved in district activities and implementing district policies and shaping, the overall culture of the school, maybe that's more, they're bringing forward an entrepreneur style. Mm-hmm. Rebels are motivated by, justice and what's different from what should be or what could be. And so rebels tend to see the gaps between what could be and should be. And there's a sense of injustice, and rebels need to be careful because right can turn into righteous. And so each of these styles has some strengths and some traps, frankly, that I outline in the book. What I will say is the way the world is changing, I hypothesize in the book, and I suggest that we all need to bring the collaborator forward. It's not the most natural style that you find, at least not in the Western cultures that I've been exposed to and I've been working in. The collaborator is less concerned about whose idea it was and more interested in the collective process of co-creating. Co-creating is easier for a collaborator, harder for an entrepreneur, a rebel, and a soloist. So I've said a lot. Those are some of the styles. As I said, they're not fixed. I like this idea of a theater, and I like the idea of like who's in the front row, who's up on stage, who's way back in the balcony, who might be actually out in the lobby in terms of these styles. And how can I bring, if my collaborator's kind of up in the balcony in the back row sitting in the dark, how can I bring that collaborator up on stage with me? And what are the things that I'm going to have to let go of to do that? Even in terms of my own identity. Mm-hmm. And what are the things that I'm going to have to lean into?
Right. And what I really want to underscore is what you said at the beginning just now, is that these styles aren't fixed. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that we have options and we have opportunities. And so if the style that you're bringing forward at any given moment is not getting you the outcomes of creativity and collaboration, then there's an opportunity to reflect and say, how do I tap into these other inner resources that are there? And that's the other thing I want to underscore here, is that to some degree, the premise of your book is that we have to let go of any old story we have about self, that we are not creative. And the reality is that we all are born creative. It's an innate ability that we all have. So those 2 points really, really important.
And Eugene, I'm going to pause there because it's a innate potential.
Say more.
And this is a huge shift, actually. It sounds like it might not be that much of a shift, but it's a real big shift. We all walk around in the world, the old story of creativity, and we walk around thinking it's an ability. Mm-hmm. And it's normally distributed amongst the population. And some people are just, we're all creative, but some people are more creative than others, and some people are not as creative as others. And many of us see ourselves in the middle. And I've done this exercise where I ask people to stand on a line, an imaginary line, highly creative on one end and not so creative or not creative at all on the other end. And it forms a bell curve just in terms of where people line up. And people give all sorts of reasons and excuses, and we have an interesting discussion. But this idea that creativity is an ability and it's doled out in different doses to different people is very rooted in our understanding of what it is. So one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was I really want to bust that idea, that old story of creativity. When creativity is seen as a potential, what changes is the circumstances, not anything about you. There's no difference in your work, in your home life, whether you're participating in community activities, whether you're drawing a drawing or painting a painting or writing music or kayaking on the on the waterway. Nothing changes about us. Nothing changes about you, only the circumstances. And so as a potential, the potential exists until the circumstances call for it. So we can start to ask some deeper questions. And I ask these in the book. Is your life calling for your creativity? I would say it is. That's why I asked those questions in the beginning. I would say it is, but are we conscious of all the ways we could channel and focus our creativity on the opportunities and the challenges that we're facing and on realizing the dreams that we'd like to? So really important shift. And for example, when you come from the potential-based view, we never have to have another Fast Company cover that says the 50 most creative people, because there's 8 million or however many people are most creative people. I would like to tell everyone listening, you are highly creative. So if that doesn't resonate, or if some way you feel disconnected from that, then look to the circumstances and find ways to build greater access and relationship with this incredible potential.
Great. I think that we could stop right there, and I feel like our visitors would get a lot just from that. And this really brings me to one of the infographics that you have, that is purpose, constraint, and possibility. And right around the same section of the book, you speak about how the outcomes that we imagine are reaching back to help us realize them. And I see that infographic as being really important in the context of that statement. And so again, I'm going to turn it over to you, because again, your passion is just oozing, and your knowledge is contagious, and it's exciting to watch you and listen to you. So I'm just going to turn it back to you. If you can speak to those two things, that'd be great.
The idea that the futures we imagine are reaching back to us is not a new one. One of my favorite quotes is a Rumi quote: what you seek is seeking you. And it's a little bit of maybe a spiritual almost component to this whole thing. The 3 truths that I talk about in the book are: there are multiple futures ahead of us. We have agency, but not control. And the futures we seek are seeking us. And so what you've brought forward is one of these 3 truths. And I think, as I said, it's one of the more spiritual ones of those, and requires some measure of faith or trust in what wants to emerge, what wants to happen in our lives and with our creations. With respect to the intersection of purpose, possibility, and constraint, that is where creativity gets activated, in that intersection. And it all starts with a compelling and meaningful purpose. Why should my creativity show up today? We want employees to stay in the company. We want them to feel like this is a place where I belong and I can do my best work. That's a purpose that's going to drive great creativity in an organization. Man on the Moon in 10 years, one of the famous ones. There are so many purposes. Navigating a difficult divorce is also another purpose. There are so many purposes around us that require our creativity, big and small. But what are those purposes, and how can I bring that purpose into clear focus and frame it in terms of benefit or value to people, myself or others, right? So when I have purpose, something different needs to happen from what the status quo is. Then I start to dance between possibility and constraint. And we have this other myth that's part of the old story that says that creativity only happens in the possibility space of this intersection. And the coming up with ideas and possibilities and brainstorming and all that stuff that we do, right? We tend to think that that's creativity, but it's not. It's only one part of the intersection. And we have to have a purpose that requires us to go beyond the status quo. We, of course, want possibilities, but oftentimes people come to this intersection first through the constraints. What are all the things that we can't do? What can't we change for all the right reasons? What can't we change because of a policy or a law or some restriction to our right to operate? What are some of those constraints? And then what are the possibilities? And it takes all three for creativity to really blossom and emerge. And I think this is a really important point. Some people are more possibility oriented and some people are more constraint oriented. And in this way of thinking in the news story of creativity, I would encourage everyone listening to think, how do I approach? Do I approach with what are the risks? What are the trade-offs? What could go wrong? What looks like it's going to be hard to change? Or do I come with, hey, let's throw feasibility and viability out of the window and let's just imagine things. And we need a diversity of these orientations in any team or effort. No one is more valuable than the other. And I know a lot of more constraint-oriented folks who believe they're not that creative because they're focused on the rules or what is going to be challenging to change. So let's bust that myth too, Eugene, that creativity is about the possibility piece of it. It's actually about the intersection of all three, purpose being the most important.
And I love the busting of the myth about the constraint part, because we even sometimes refer to people as Debbie Downers, always pointing out why it won't work. And the reality is that kind of thinking can actually, I think, spur possibility and also help you to be a little bit more practical or even realistic about what your boundaries are. And so that, and I want to pull a little thread on something that you said about that. And I think when you and I met to briefly prepare, I said to you that at the end of the book, you talked about getting your degree in something and spirituality. And I said to him, all of a sudden at the end of the book, I was like, oh, that's why, because throughout the whole book, I kept feeling that there was a spiritual element, to the way that it was written and the way that you speak about creativity. And so I have a question about, in the context of working, in biotech, pharma, in a space that's very science oriented, what do you do to get something that maybe feels a little like you need faith and hope? How do you form that or present that so that it appeals to these science-based people?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gene, and I'm going to go there in a minute. But first, I'm going to just do a little bit of a backtrack for just a minute. Yeah. The orientation that I hope to bring to people in the book is like a life is happening through us orientation. And I know a lot of people operating in the world with a life is happening to me orientation, and I can be incredibly creative in rebounding and adapting when I'm living in a life is happening to me orientation. The next step might be life is happening by me, by my efforts. I have agency, I can change my circumstances, right? And so we call that self-authored mind. And there's an incredible amount of creativity there as I start to open up. And maybe I'm thinking like it's happening because I'm my effort, my expertise, I'm the one making things happen, right? There is there are a couple of other levels in adult development theory, and the next one is the one that I think I'm aiming for when as you notice this element of spiritual psychology in the book, and that is life is happening through me. And I think when I work with people and their creativity, I like to focus on what wants to emerge and what the emergent space is. And not very many people in my world, and not very many of my clients in other industries and in organizations that I work with are focused on what wants to emerge. And we're under, very tough timelines, lots of pressure. There's incredible demand for deliverables. So there's an enormous amount of pressure and expectation that we bring our creativity into in social systems like organizations. So it's hard sometimes to stop and think, well, what wants to happen here? If I'm a conduit, or if I'm open to the emergent, how can I help facilitate that, right? So when I work with folks, some of the most important things that I do are ask as many powerful questions as I possibly can as a coach or a facilitator or so forth. And those questions are questions that open up possibilities at the time when that's appropriate, and also incorporate constraints and talk about feasibility and viability and desirability when that's important. And so scientists, IT folks, product development folks, also, people understand the idea of experimentation. So that's another avenue in to work with folks. How can we start to experiment? How can we loosen a little bit some of the striving and expectations we put on what we're developing and what we're doing, just to notice what's happening, to be a little bit more spherical in our thinking and what we're noticing. Powerful questions, the number one tool, I think, in working with folks around there. And then just the idea that I'm not the content expert in most of the worlds that I work in. It's others. I'm not a process engineer. I'm not an IT specialist. I'm not a research scientist, but I can be there and create a space for others to allow that emergent in, to allow spaciousness, even if it's a little bit of spaciousness, that can go a long way in a process, and stepping away from execution for a moment and playing a little bit in discovery. Almost every meeting I facilitate, I'm probably certain this is true for you too. Somewhere along the line when we're doing team agreements, someone will say, well, we should have fun. And sometimes it's last in the list of things that people generate, trust, confidentiality, that kind of stuff. Oh, we should have fun. Usually what people mean by that is, I want to play outside of the rules a little bit. I want to do something different. I want to be in a different kind of energetic space rather than action orientation or thinking about plans and deliverables and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, let's make space for discovery and adventure, even if it's moments.
I think you've answered my question perfectly, in terms of powerful questions and creating space. I want to build a little bit on the creating of space, because I know that you, like I, have probably been in a situation where people will talk to you about facilitating a workshop, and then they have a laundry list of things that they want to accomplish, but they only have 2 hours. Yep. And so there's this sense of urgency. I want everything, and I want it yesterday. And so the creative process, I think, in some ways, it takes whatever it takes in my mind. And so somehow. So my question is really, how do you support people in creating that space that you're speaking about, in an environment where there's so many pressures to now? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, when people come to me and talk to me about the face-to-faces or the offsites or the workshops or whatever, the team and what's happening with the team, oftentimes they have ideas for what needs to be done, and what's the module that we need to have, or what's the discussion that we need to have. And all of that is great. I put all of that in the bucket of constraints, because that's, it's not really a constraint in a bad way. It's just like, that's where that person is coming from. And so I have to take that into account. I'm not free to invent completely. I have to honor that, right? So already we're in a bit of the intersection, but what is the purpose? What is that person after? Or what is that team hoping to achieve? Or what's the outcome that they're after? And I find often what I need to do is step back just a little bit and focus on clarifying the purpose, or maybe even reframing the purpose as more of a vision of breakthrough, where it's a narrative about what people are feeling or thinking, or what's possible for people with respect to whatever they're trying to achieve. Why are we here? What's possible for people? What can the organization do? What is the organization becoming? Who am I becoming? These are important questions to help clarify, and then to decide whether the ideas that any one person or any number of people might have about what has to happen in that agenda or that session, whether those will actually serve the purposes. And if not, if they can, great. If not, maybe we take a deeper dive into possibility thinking and balance that with the constraints as we develop the agenda.
Yeah, I love the idea of focusing on purpose, because I do think that does begin to open the aperture. I want to keep pulling on this thread just a little bit, because in some ways, what I'm hearing you say is that all of these styles are essential to having a productive, creative dialogue. I'm hearing you say that the it is working with you to help itself emerge. And yet, again, I come back to this idea of time constraints, budget constraints, and in reading your book, it's clear that there's a growth mindset that kind of permeates that you can support people in tapping into those parts of themselves that they normally don't tap into as often. I guess what I'm wondering is, there may be some people who think that they need to curate who's on the team in order to move fast. What would you say about that? Because, some people would say, I want to get rid of the Debbie Downers. I want more of the entrepreneur. I want more of this. But it's clear that you're saying you need all of these elements. And so I'm just going to shut up and let you respond to that.
Yeah, I think again, I go back to purpose. If the purpose is clear and if it's shared purpose, we can go a lot faster, because if we are aligned around shared purpose, it's deeply felt, deeply understood. I can trust you to take the parts of the whole process that I'm inviting you, or we all are asking you to take forward, and I trust that you'll get the input you need. You'll make the decision. You'll iterate. We're steeped in agile, and I've been working in sort of the agile mindset, not hardcore agile methodology, but the agile mindset for some time, right? And so we're striving to iterate more often, get feedback and whatever customer means to you, input early and often along the way, right? So if we have shared purpose, and if that purpose is actually strong, right? Remember, weak purposes don't yield less creativity. They are about the circumstances. And so if I have a weak or poorly articulated purpose, when other obligations of life or the latest fire or the latest crisis or whatever comes in, right, I'm going to abandon my creative quest and go to work on that. So clarifying the shared purpose really creates a field of trust. And that trust then gives rise to the possibility for true empowerment, not just empowerment in word, but if I can pull back my empowerment whenever I want to, or if something's happening that I don't like, then we're not really empowering, right? So the very first thing and the most important thing is to align on shared purpose, and then that's what actually helps generate the speed and accelerates the process. Then you talk a little bit about the diversity on the team. Yeah, sometimes I have to pay attention to who's on the core team and who's in the next layer out, and who are the folks who I'm gathering input from. I famously say in the book, and it's like something I deeply feel, the legal department inside of my organization or my clients' organizations is such a critical ally. And when I say that to my HR colleagues, they are sort of quizzical, like by the legal department. But I've seen so many times teams work on something only to arrive some months later at some design of something that is not legally possible. It has to be viable, right? So I say the legal department is my greatest friend, and I want to go to all the people around who are the ones who will give me information about what those constraints are, right? So Debbie Downer is, there are lots and lots of people who are constraint oriented who are not Debbie. They firmly believe that an understanding of constraints opens up possibilities. And then there are people who believe that the constraints should shut us down. And for me, that's sad. Mm-hmm. And I like to try as best I can to work with folks like that and coach them into seeing that the constraints are opportunities. Yeah, so I've said a lot, but hopefully I answered the question.
You did. You answered the question, and I'm being mindful of time. I do want to ask you one more question before we move into Q&A. So I work with a lot of organizations in every industry. We all do and have, and sometimes I walk into an organization where there has been a historical, hierarchical command and control environment, and so I'm wondering how this methodology, how this approach, when people, again, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, might have a little bit of PTSD, and they're afraid to push, they're afraid to take risk, afraid to challenge. How might you approach bringing these tools in that kind of an environment when, and again, it's sad to say, but I've seen the fear at multiple layers. And so it could be that the CEO or someone at a high level is somehow has shut things down, and it's hard to shake at times. So how might you bring this methodology, these tools, to that kind of an environment?
Let me talk about my own story here. I found myself in a situation where I was feeling those kinds of constraints. I was feeling squashed, and I was feeling diminished, and I wasn't taking accountability for for those feelings, and I was disconnected, from the creative potential. I had to change my circumstances. Yeah, I was applying it in different places in my work, and yeah, I was enjoying that and working with clients, but I was in a situation that felt really constraining to me, and just I could not thrive in that situation. And I had to face the hard truth that wasn't the place for me. And that can be incredibly scary, as it was for me. I was totally mortified. Like, what am I going to do now that I know I can't stay here? Mm-hmm. And that's when my creativity woke up with respect to this particular purpose. Mm-hmm. How am I going to find that place where I'm going to thrive? Became my purpose. And then I'm dealing with the constraints and the possibilities, and I'm dancing again in the intersection, but I've chosen consciously to focus my creative potential on this particular challenge and opportunity, right? So for folks who are out there in really challenging situations, I might say, I've never seen an environment where talent flow was more possible than it is right now. People are starting up new ventures. People are leaving places that don't feel right, and taking a risk and making things up, charting their own course, right? So there's something happening in the air that is, I think, enabling more freedom in this space. If I would like to stay, if I choose to stay, if I say I go on that inner journey in the first adventure of the book, and I change my story of who I am, and I still want to stay, and this place is right for me, and I can find that, then I'm going to start building my network. I'm going to start standing together with others. I'm going to let go of this idea that I'm doing this alone, and I'm going to start building alliances, contracting those alliances, designing those alliances. Sometimes we call that strengthening my network, and starting to think about how I can do whatever it is I was doing before. Me as a soloist, or maybe entrepreneurs, rebels, and soloists a little bit more than collaborators. How can I start to create the circumstances or change the circumstances so that I can bring this new me in and do the best work I can?
Great. Steve, I probably have a bajillion more cards and a bajillion more questions, but I do want to open it up to everyone else as well. I'm going to thank you now again, and I can't say enough. There are 3 books that will be sent out, so don't leave yet, because Paul's going to make sure that he at the end works with you to make sure that people get a book. But this has been great. I do think that you bring a lot of passion and a lot of knowledge about this particular topic, and probably many others, but really useful hour for me, and I hope for everyone else. My last question for you, take a moment. What are the top 2 or 3 bullets you want people to take away from this conversation, or even from the book, that to kind of put a bookend on this, so to say? What do you want them to take?
Yeah, I'd like to invite people to into a new story of what creativity is and who they are as a creator. So if I say, or as I say, you are highly creative, and as you pay attention to how that bounces around inside of your being, are you like, yeah, I get it, or I'm not so sure, or like many people, arguing for their limitations with me when I suggest this. So where I in the introduction of the book, I say, like, where's your creativity? Is it up on stage with you, right there where the action is happening? Is it sitting, in the first row watching? Is it way back, or is it checked out in the lobby? So I guess my maybe my one takeaway is, I invite you into the new story that you're highly creative, and it's all about the circumstances and the world of work as the way it's changing. We have to get better at creating together.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you to share some questions with us.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. We have one question in the Q&A here, a little bit lengthy, but I'll try to summarize it. Steve, you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today that people themselves have to call for their potential creativity themselves. The question that they followed up with was, how best can organizations or institutions or other outsiders call for that same creativity from a person or from persons? How best does that work?
I love Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And there's the part about the journey where you have to answer the call, you hear the call and you answer the call. And sometimes I just want to put a pin in the fact, sometimes the call does come from outside of us. We still have to answer that call. Like, if my boss asks me to work on a project, or if, there's a pipe that breaks in the house, or there's a flood or a tornado, or my loved one gets a diagnosis of a terminal disease, or there's a pandemic, right? Those are calls from the outside, and we answer those calls. And then there are calls that are generated from within that have to do with our desires and aims and our passions and who we are and what we want to bring into this world, right? So that's the first part. I think organizations can do a lot. The first two things that come to my mind are develop a meaningful shared purpose. And just checking the box, like delivering the training, I'll just use a training and development example. Like, delivering the training can't be the compelling purpose. Everyone in the company going through some training, right? That's not a compelling purpose, that's an activity. Okay, well, what's the output of that activity? Oh, we're going to develop understanding and proficiency. Maybe that's output. But what's the outcome we're after? People are making better decisions, or people are making better informed decisions, or customers are getting what they need from us sooner and faster with greater ease, right? So what are the outcomes we're after? And then how do we pull back? So organizations can get better at framing the purpose that activates that intersection. Organizations can get better about how people encounter and navigate obstacles. This notion of, like, it's always been that way, or you can't, change that, or whatever, all those things that sometimes these messages we hear, those are, for anyone not deeply committed to a creative quest, those can stop you in your tracks, right? So that it's a two-sided coin. The organization can get better at being really careful. What obstacles and constraints are non-negotiable for all the right reasons, like in the pharmaceutical industry, patient safety, or we would hope in the world of social media and data privacy or security, right? And some obstacles are non-negotiable for now. There's an employment law, a policy, a right to operate restriction, whatever it is. But I can change that through advocacy and activism, maybe over time. And then there's a lot of these obstacles and constraints that are actually more negotiable. So if leaders and organizations as systems start to loosen our grip on what we think is an obstacle that really isn't necessarily one, that's another great place to play. Psychological safety, very important. One of my gurus that I look to, Gary Pisano at Harvard, he talks about how with psychological safety, you have to be able to navigate brutal candor or radical candor. And so those two things go hand in hand. So yeah, there's so many things that organizations can do to help shape the circumstances that would then bring people's creative potential out more.
Okay, great. Paul, do we have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, we got one more that came in here. I like how they phrase this. There's an old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. What can organizations do with, and they emphasize, and for, F-O-R, and for team members who insist that they are not creative?
Well, yeah, again, I've had any number of tens and possibly hundreds of people arguing for their limitations. And I would just say, if you're walking around with an ability-based definition of creativity, you're limiting yourself. You've got what I call in the book creativity disruption disorder, CDD. It had to be some kind of acronym because I come from the world of life sciences, right? And in some ways, yeah, there's a responsibility on the person. They need to show up. They need to want to step into a different story of themselves as creators. And I am not accountable for them and for their willingness to answer the call or passion to answer the call. I would say, and maybe this is a bit contentious, but maybe it's not, you know, if where we're going and what we need is outcomes that require our creativity to come forward, and I've got folks on the team who are not there and not willing to even explore getting there, I think that's, you know, we talk about performance issues and we talk about letting people go because they're not executing. Maybe we should be a little more open to the idea of like, oh, maybe there's, if my job and my role and the outcomes we're after require co-creation and the co-creation of value, and people just can't get there. Maybe they're too oriented towards credit. Maybe they're resisting. Maybe they're protecting their turf or their data or their whatever, right? That kind of behavior, you know, is going to become bad behavior, maybe more than it has been in the past. Maybe we're going to become more conscious of it as bad behavior or poor performance than we have been in the past.
Again, I don't think that's contentious, Steve. I actually think that sometimes that experience for someone can be the exact situation that allows them to reflect on themselves. And sometimes we keep people, we protect them from themselves in a way, and keep them from experiencing what they need to experience in order to evolve. So,
yeah, I mean, like myself, realizing at that moment I was talking about earlier, that this was not the right place for me. And there was nothing wrong with anybody there. It was actually me. And I needed to do something about it. And we might hope that people would come to that realization, or maybe even decide to stay and try some experiment with some different ways of being. And then there will be times when we have to do something about it.
One more question, and this actually comes from me because it just hit me right now, and that is just kind of going on the titles here, the co-creating. Looking at the title, there's that lead in, the prefix co-creating. How much of this can be a shared endeavor, whether it's partly through modeling or partly through just providing an example of, hey, this is something I'm thinking about. What are your ideas about it? Oh, partner in crime over here, that is maybe a little hesitant or reticent about taking the dive. How do you see kind of this hand in glove relationship facilitating a creativity process?
In the book, I talk about 5 principles for co-creating. There were some authors in the 70s and 80s who talked about the 10 commandments of intrapreneuring, and I think that those were time bound. They were from a different time, like protecting my invention from any forces that would seek to destroy it, and being ready to throw my badge on the table. And there was all kinds of stuff in there that sounded like rebels, entrepreneurs, and soloists. And again, I think the trick here for everyone is going to be to bring forward the collaborator, and to loosen our grip. I know for me, it's a lot of work to loosen my grip on what I think is the right way to go. Because in a co-creative process, I embrace other people's priorities, other people's visions. And if I'm honest with myself, that's not easy for me all the time. I think I know the best way to go. And I talk about in the book, sometimes like in a team process, I'll raise my hand to take on the next actions because I want to have my stamp on them. And so for me, it's a constant process of including and letting go and listening and asking questions to understand, and then standing behind decisions that are made by other people. That is not always necessarily easy for me. If I really feel passionate about how it should go, sometimes it's hard to stand behind decisions that are going in a different direction. I see people struggle with that one too. So there's a lot of letting go, and there's a lot of leaning in co-creation. And I encourage people to look into the book and the 5 principles. And one that's really important, we didn't get to today, but that's about sharing leadership. And I think we need to see leadership as a potential as well that arises from circumstances, not from ability.
Or title.
Or title, certainly not from title, but that arises from circumstances. And that opens a possibility for us to share leadership in a way we may not even be able to imagine today.
I really do appreciate that yin and yang dualistic pull of inclusivity and letting go. I think that's a core critical component that I had never thought of before until you mentioned it. So thank you for that.
But I just want to say thank you again. I want to encourage all of you to get the book. Maybe Steve will grace us with another session sometime in the future when the next book comes out or something. I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to tell you a little bit about our next session. Again, thank you, Steve. I wish you much success on your journey with the book, and I will see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Eugene. Thanks for the opportunity.
Paolo, there we go.
Okay, here we go. So our next Dilan Delivers webinar is going to occur on Thursday, August the 18th at 12 noon, high noon here in Pacific time zone, titled Mental Health Shift Happened. It's featuring Michael Puck and Tasha Serena Pereira. This is a short description of that program. Mental health issues that are an all-time high, but for many companies, this is unfamiliar and uncomfortable territory. EAPs are not equipped to address this issue, as it doesn't just impact the 20% of individuals diagnosed with a mental health illness, but equally the other 80% who are coping with varying degrees of mental health challenges. Understanding this complex matter better, cutting through the associated stigma, and identifying what companies can control or influence to address this pressing issue is at the core of this engaging and insightful presentation. They're going to start off by defining mental health, which will lead participants into an eye-opening conclusion. You'll eventually hear why effective mental health initiatives need to start with the employer and not with the employee. It will then transition into revealing practical suggestions on reducing or even eliminating the most pervasive determinants of mental health within the workplace. And finally, we'll wrap up with a journey into recent discoveries in the field of neuroscience to illustrate lesser known methods of addressing determinants of mental health from the inside out. And that will occur about a month from now, Thursday, August 18th, 12 noon Pacific. Hopefully within the next week or so, we will have the Eventbrite notice up there with the ability for people to go ahead and register for that program. We do want to thank you for your participation today and attendance at today's meeting. Again, we will be posting this on YouTube very shortly in our Dilan Delivers YouTube channel. If you need to ever get a hold of us for anything here at Dilan Consulting Group, here are our phone number, our email, and our presence on the web. please reach out to us anytime for any of your questions or concerns or things that you think that we may be able to assist you and or your organizations transition through. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for attending today's presentation, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next Dilan Delivers webinar a month from now. Thank you very much. Take care.